This video is sponsored by Professional Photographers of America.
All right, what's going on, guys? Dan Watson, and we're gonna be taking a look at the Sony A7 IV, but not just that camera. Every camera that competes with that or could be a compelling alternative for you, whether you're in the market for a new camera or you're looking to upgrade, a whole bunch of other stuff. These are some cameras that you should be looking at instead of the Sony A7 IV, especially because this is an awesome camera. But Sony went all out in a few areas, and there were a couple of areas that they seemingly held back on, or some of the competition might be a little bit better on. There are actually a few Sony cameras that you might want to look at. So depending on if you find yourself eyeing that brand new camera, maybe you just weren't all that impressed with it, maybe you're just not a Sony fan or looking for other alternatives, or maybe just have a completely different budget or wonder if you should upgrade at all, here are my favorite Sony A7 IV alternatives. So if you haven't checked out the Sony A7 IV review, definitely go check that out. I just had to send back my review unit, but I did buy one and it is coming in any day now. But I did some absolutely awesome shoots with the camera while we had it. Plus I've got a lot more lined up. So definitely sub and like if you haven't already. Join us for some of these videos. But this is going to be interesting because there was one area that Sony chose to push even more with the A7 IV. And that is the resolution. And unfortunately, this kind of triggered some of the bigger downsides to the camera. So the first major competition for the A7 IV is actually from Sony itself, and that's the A7R III. And it's an absolutely crazy sale right now. If you haven't seen the sale, go check it out. It actually makes it cheaper than the Sony A7 IV. It has more resolution at 42 megapixels, amazing image quality, and the same 10 frames per second shooting, despite the fact that this is higher resolution. And still to this day, the A7R III is actually one of the highest performing sensors that Sony has ever made. You might also see the A7R IIIA, which is super confusing, I know. It's an identical camera to this. It just has a higher resolution screen and an upgraded USB-C port. So hopefully that helps. If you see it, it's basically the same camera on there. But if you are a landscape photographer especially, the A7R III is a better camera and a cheaper camera with this sale. If you shoot portraits, it still might be an amazing camera to choose from, but definitely if you're landscape or product, this is going to be the camera to check out. So next we're going to talk about probably the biggest competition to the A7 IV. But first I want to talk to you about a nonprofit organization you might have heard me talk about, and that is Professional Photographers of America, or PPA. I've actually been a PPA member for several years now. And with that, not only am I getting $15,000 of equipment coverage included with my membership, but it is also giving me access to so much more. So things like discounts, I have tons of access to courses and education, but something you probably don't know about yet is PPA's indemnification trust. And I know you're thinking, what is that? And this coverage is actually designed specifically for photographers and covers for things like data loss recovery services and even your legal fees if you were to ever have an unhappy client with that. So yeah, I hope I never have to use it, but in case I do, just know that PPA's got your back. All you have to do is call, file a claim, and boom, help is on the way. So you can sign up for a membership with a discount using the link below. And so get yourself a membership and start using PPA today. So next up is probably the most direct competitor to the Sony A7 IV, and that is going to be the Canon EOS R6. And this is actually the EOS R5 because my wife is shooting with the R6 right now. And we do have a full comparison coming out between these two cameras, so make sure you're subbed and throw on notifications, and that will be a pretty epic shoot, I guarantee you. But these cameras really trade blows in quite a few areas, but there are two main ones that the R6 really comes out on top. And one is going to be for things like high speed shooting. So if you're using over 10 frames per second, high frame rate shooting, or 4K 60. And again, most of these are strictly due to the fact that Sony went higher resolution, but the R6 can now shoot 12 frames per second with mechanical shutter, or 20 frames per second in electronic shutter for like 200 plus frames in RAW. While the Sony A7 IV is topping out at 10 frames per second in both mechanical or electric. You can't shoot any faster than that. And it actually slows down to more like 6 frames per second once you want to shoot either lossless compressed or uncompressed RAW. And really, I was only getting about 40 frames before filling up the buffer, even with super high speed SD cards. So things do get a little bit better if you use CF Express cards, but yeah, Those cards are pretty crazy expensive. It's pretty tough to even find them in stock right now. But if you do, just know they are a lot more expensive than even high-speed UHS-2. Now, when it comes to the video, I think the lead overall is mostly going to be with the Sony A7 IV. It has more compression and bitrate options. You have unlimited recording, less overheating issues, more detail thanks to larger oversampling. But there is one thing that Canon does have: full frame 4K 60. And I know there are plenty of situations where the 4K 60 crop mode is absolutely fine. It might even be a benefit for certain situations. However, I do shoot slow motion with wide angle lenses quite a bit. So whether it's things like cars, weddings for room shots, in venues, real estate work, and there is really no good way to actually get wide angle shots using that 4K 60 mode without switching to like APS-C lenses or something like that. Again, a full comparison is coming soon, but if you're somebody who cares about frame rates, buffers, or 4K 60 specifically more with wide angle lenses, definitely check out the Canon R6. So another really interesting option, especially for videographers, is going to be the Panasonic S1. It's a camera that not a whole lot of people talk about. This is actually the S1H, which is kind of the big brother to the S1, and you can shoot photos with this all day long. I mean, it's a great photo camera, but more specifically for video, with the exception of autofocus, this camera is amazing. It has tons of features, tons of customization on it, amazing quality with great neutral colors, unlimited recording. It is built like a tank. It also has a larger screen on it, and basically is the exact same price as the A7 IV, and it has 4K full frame. So that's going to be the big one. You still have the ability to shoot things like 422 10-bit, plus it also has a 6K option. So definitely if you're a videographer, this system is actually better. Now it also has some of the best IBIS performance on the market, whether you're shooting photo or video. Honestly, the only downside to this camera is going to be the fact that the autofocus, especially in continuous, can be a little bit jumpy. And then the native lens selections for these, it uses this Leica S mount right here. And the native lens selections are not quite as good as if you're shooting like Sony or Canon, but the lenses that they do have are really, really awesome. So definitely if you're taking a look, especially if you're a videographer and don't care as much about continuous autofocus, the Panasonic S1 is absolutely incredible. Now, another really interesting camera worth mentioning, especially if you're not quite at the budget for a Sony A7 IV and a whole bunch of lenses for it, is going to be the Fujifilm XT4. I don't have that camera right here, but I did a review on it, so you can go check it out. It's a really cool review. And that camera is really interesting because it kind of excels where the Sony A7 IV doesn't. So it is an APS-C camera, so you don't get full frame at all. However, the image quality is still great, 26 megapixels, and the highlight roll-off is so good that it really kind of looks like you have more dynamic range than it does, but it is at smaller sensors. So something is going to be lost right there, but it does have 15 frames per second with mechanical shutter, 20 frames per second with electronic shutter. It looks amazing, and it also happens to be on a sale right now, which makes it about $1,000 cheaper than the Sony A7 IV. You still get video 4K 60 10-bit. Again, the whole camera is cropped, so you're not going to get any full frame options, but if you're shooting 4K 60 a lot, at least there is no downside. And the Fujifilm does have a lot of really solid wide angle lenses that you can use in that 4K 60. So yeah, for $1,000 less, you get something that's really capable, still has amazing image quality. And if you're shooting that 4K 60 video, there really is no downside at all. Now, a lot of people have actually brought up the Sony A7S III for comparison, which is my main video camera of choice right here. Now, that is because the Sony A7 IV really doesn't have 4K 60 full frame. So just by nature, the A7S III's existence, people kind of use it as an excuse. Like if you want to shoot that, you can go ahead and get that camera. To me, that's not really the problem because the A7S III is more of a dedicated video camera. It's not that great for hybrid shooting, or if you want it as a photo camera too, whereas the A7 IV is really good for both. It's a hybrid camera, it can do everything well. And I'd also make the argument that having 4K 60 is really good even if it's just a hybrid camera. And another comparison is with the Sony A7 III, which while it's still a very good camera if you already own it, I wouldn't be running out to go buy one right now. What is a better option, right now at least, is the Nikon Z6II, which I feel like it gets dismissed quite a bit, but I'm actually a pretty big fan of it. It's over $500 cheaper than the A7 IV, and it really is a better camera in a few ways than the Sony A7 III. So it can shoot 14 frames per second on it, although it does slow down a little bit if you use continuous autofocus, but the ergonomics on this are amazing. The image quality is amazing. You actually have a little bit better and larger touchscreen on this. And it still shoots 4K 60. It does shoot it in a crop mode only, but it's something that you're going to be left with on the Sony A7 IV anyway, so really no downside there. So, but just being honest with you, the Nikon Z6II is not quite to the level of a Sony A7 IV when it comes to autofocus. It also doesn't have 10-bit internal video, but I will say the 8-bit from the Nikon looks way better than the 8-bit video profiles on the Sony. So it can shoot 10-bit or RAW actually over HDMI output, but if you're shooting internal, it's not quite as good. But if you like Nikon cameras especially and haven't bought one yet, this is solid image quality at a much cheaper price, and I definitely think it's worth checking out. Now, I do think Sony is actually still winning the hybrid game right now. Nothing else just comes close in all of the areas that they had. However, I also think Sony had the opportunity and the tech to destroy the competition and make things a little bit better. However, they just didn't quite pull it off in a couple of areas. I do think that they are absolutely capable of, with one firmware update, coming out with the features that would make this the camera to beat. One of them for me is going to be the ability to shoot something like a medium RAW, say a 20 megapixel RAW file instead of the 33 megapixel default RAW. Canon and Nikon have this ability. I think virtually everyone else has this ability. That should allow you to get more frames before the buffer fills up, and hopefully even 10 frames per second still shooting in uncompressed RAW. So if you want to prioritize those frames per second, you can just go a little bit lower resolution and still have that option. The other thing I think they can deliver inside of that firmware update is a pixel bin 4K 60 full frame option. They have this in the Sony A7R III. They have it in the Sony A7R IV. These are both high resolution cameras and they can absolutely do it. Sure, it wouldn't have the same quality as the APS-C mode because that oversamples from most of the sensor on there, but I do think at least having the option, if you're shooting with a wide angle lens and need a little bit wider view, you would have the option of shooting in this pixel bin mode, taking a little bit of a hit on detail, still getting that full frame sensor though to maximize low light, to maximize dynamic range, and then being able to pull off that 4K 60 full frame. But either way, the Sony A7 IV was enough that I still bought one. I have it coming in any day, so stay tuned. Appreciate the sub and like, and definitely I have some really cool stuff coming out with that. Hit me up with any questions, any thoughts on the camera that you see, and I'll see you guys soon in a new video.